Gospel Gunslingers here. Let's see if we can bust out the Word of God. It's a very special day. It's a day that I love and memories that we really ought to cherish. You know, the year's going to be gone. It seems that when key points in the calendar come around, by the time I get around to teaching on it, it's almost over. So here we are in the final moments of Memorial Day. And we've got a lot of people that are fallen in giving us the liberties that we've even forgotten. So we're going to have some fun, look at the Word a little bit, see what the Bible has to say. And you know that the Gospel Gunslingers, we kind of teach on self-defense and self-government. We're not ashamed of it. I'm actually going to tweet out this link. See if we can do that. Now I lost my picture of that. Let's just not worry about it. I get about 2 clicks from that. So all of you, please share the link. There are many people on here. So of course we're going to hit the theme of whether or not the believer ought to use force, whether we have a right and a duty to defend our women and our society and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and whether we have a right to destroy anything that is destructive of those ends. Now, our founding fathers believed absolutely that they were supposed to destroy things that were destructive of those ends, and that's how the United States came to be. It's how the great nation was founded. In fact, that very language is in our founding documents. All right, I'm just going to send out one quick text here. Maybe I could get a doorman on the job. Let's see. Here we go. So we're going to go to Romans today. And some of these passages are very well known. They're very well known and they're beloved passages. But, and it's a big but, I find that sometimes we're missing the forest through the trees, as we found in our last teaching on the earlier parts of Romans 8. So now we're going to be in the back half of Romans, and let's just start with this verse. This is an astonishing verse. When I came across this in my NIV Bible as a young missionary, it was actually on my first real full-time mission gig, summer of 93. And I came across this verse, and this verse just shocked me to the core. And in the NIV, it reads, "The God of peace will crush Satan under your feet shortly." And so I was camp counseling. I had a little group, and our group had to come up with a name. So we were in the D.C. metro area, outside of Washington, in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I had this little group of motley group of young'uns. And the name of our group became DC, the Devil Crushers, because of this verse. The God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. So let's look at that first in the King James. The Greek is actually for crush, is suntribu, the same word that means broken to shivers, that is in Luke 4:18, that Jesus came to heal the brokenhearted. It's a powerful word, and of course, a physical bruise where our body is bruised, it means that the flesh has been crushed. And so that's accurate, I guess. You know, the NIV Bible is pretty limp-wristed and willy-nilly and mealy-mouthed. So to find that in my NIV Bible, I was like, wow. What more does Romans have to say? So, wait. The devil's going to get crushed, and it's going to happen under our feet? So this goes to Genesis, this goes to Revelation. You know, in Genesis we have the serpent and the promise of God and the serpent being cursed, and that there would be enmity between the woman and the serpent, and that her foot would bruise, her heel would bruise his head. And so then in Revelation we see the rise of the glorious man-child. We see the woman protected, we see the rise of this overcomer company. And it was not until much later that I came across this doctrine that there's an overcomer company, that Revelation and Daniel's 70th week and the end times is not just about us getting beaten back, and beaten back. It's about the church becoming glorious and rising up. And Song of Solomon says, there is no spot in thee. The lover sees her that she has come to her place of perfection. And then the consummation. And then, after that. But for me, I came across it just in Romans, just in my daily study early on in my first posting as a full-time missionary. The God of peace will crush Satan under your feet shortly. Let's read it in the King James. 16:20 Romans. And the God of peace shall bruise Satan under your feet shortly. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. Amen. So it's easy to lose track of where we are and what the apostles are really saying when it comes to these blessings and stuff. They're kind of the begats of the New Testament, is when the greetings and the closings and the salute Epaphroditus and all that. Read that. There's some beautiful stuff in there. I believe the Lord will begin to show it to you. But the apostles praying that God will pour out his grace on these people that he's writing to, and saying, hang on, because God's going to crush Satan under your feet. Under your feet, under your feet. No, not somebody else is going to do it. Not under the police's feet. No, he's going to call 911, and then somebody else is going to get to do the crushing. It's our honor as the Lord's servants and as saints. All right, I got so many verses here that I want to cover. Let's just back up a little bit. Let's back up in 16. Because a lot of people misread these passages that we're supposed to be always forbearing and always turning the other cheek. That there are mulligans that are reserved for the brethren, no matter how dim-witted they may be. There are some mulligans that are reserved for them. But then there's another class of troublemakers. And those troublemakers come in and they're like, okay, I'm going to start over with a fresh count, no balls, no strikes. And they expect to be able to bumble and offend their way to a full count at least before they get dealt with harshly. Let's just jump over to Titus before. I'm not even going to read that verse in 16. Let's go over to Titus. Where the Lord's telling the young apostle. Here's this young fella that the apostles speaking to the young apostle. The T's are before Hebrews. 1st and 2nd Timothy, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, then Timothy, then Titus. Okay, so here's Titus. And this comes up twice. Bum, bum, bum. 1:13. This witness is true, wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith. So he flatly tells the young apostle, and this was a young guy that, he was being set in authority. And so he wasn't really game to just tangle with everybody. He might have been a tough slugger, but it wasn't his intention from the get-go. So the apostle tells him, now, anybody comes in the dojo and cause trouble, then you deal with them right there. Rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith. And he's telling them, look, there's hope for them to come back, these troublemakers. So, of course, there's different classes, but what this says is by sound doctrine, both to exhort and convince the gainsayers. Those are those who speak against. That's what gainsaying is. For there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they had the circumcision. People were wanting to turn them back to the law and command heathen men to become circumcised. It's hard enough to get them to let go of their idols, stop fighting for their virgin mother. They don't need to be circumcised. One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said the Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. This witness is true. Wherefore, rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not giving heed to Jewish fables. See, this is another rule on the dojo floor is, no telling stories. Only the sensei gets to tell stories on the dojo floor. Yeah, the guys with low white belts and colored belts, unless they're in charge for a moment, they don't get to spin yarn. One time I was, yeah, no, we're not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men that turn from the truth. 16. So there's a lot of people that come around the fellowship that are not of us. They need to be rebuked. You don't just grab them, with a little velvety soft, hand. Thanks, Vinny. I appreciate that. Yes, we do need your donations. Just click the About here on YouTube. It's got my mailing address. It's got our PayPal link, or you can go to GospelGunslingers.com, and there's several buttons there, and I'll transfer your donation into pesos and get a lot done with it. How do you like my quiet place, by the way, to broadcast? Yeah, I had to go and buy the airtime, but here we are, la Casita Pelirroja, and we're broadcasting in air-conditioned comfort at all hours of the day. So, right after the apostle tells young Timothy, young Titus, to rebuke sharply, he says in chapter 2, 15, these things speak and exhort and rebuke with all authority. Let no man despise thee. So we say that haters are going to hate. But the apostle said to the youngster, he said, now don't you let the haters hate. If the getters get you, you get to get your Glock. Someone once said. All right. What does that mean, let no man despise thee? We've talked about Michal and her sin for despising the prophet, the king, her husband. She shouldn't have done that. And when people get to hating like that, then we have to deal with them. All right. Back to Romans. 16:17. I beseech you, brethren, mark them which cause divisions and offenses, contrary to the doctrine which you've learned, and avoid them. All right. So, you see, this is aside from the brethren. These are those that cause divisions and offenses, who come in to worm their way and cause trouble. All right. Oh, there's something really, 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 really important here. I'm not sure I'm ready to do it right now. But I don't want to miss it. On this day when we're remembering our own nation, and we're dealing with troublemakers, there's another nation I want to talk about. Let's go to chapter 15 and verse 25. But now I go into Jerusalem to minister unto the saints. And, when I have to deal with people for being hostile, a lot of times they're like, it's lost on them why they should have been nice, why they should have been patient. 26. For it has pleased them in Macedonia and Achaia to make a certain contribution for the poor saints which are at Jerusalem. There's some poor saints at Jerusalem, don't you know? And I want you to hear this. This is a major point in doctrine. Take your King James Bible. You should have that. This is Romans 15:27 and continuing. It hath pleased them verily. So the saints were happy to give this donation. It hath pleased them. They were happy to give it. It hath pleased them verily. And their debtors they are. So the saints in these faraway places realized that they were debtors to the Jews in Jerusalem. Now, this is the New Testament. Jesus has died and risen. A bunch of time's gone by, decades at this point. There's works springing up. They'd already settled all the issues of the heathen coming into the fellowship, not keeping the law, not being Jews. The New Testament was, these letters were being written in Greek, not in Hebrew. And what does the apostle say? Their debtors they are. So the saints owe a debt to the Jews at Jerusalem. And it's on your head too, if you're alive today. And here's why. It continues. For if the Gentiles, that's me, if the Gentiles have been made partakers of their spiritual things, their duty is also to minister unto them in carnal things. Do you know that you're a son of Abraham if you're a believer in the Lord Jesus? Do you know you've been grafted in to the tribe of Judah? All right, it's time to get a hold of that and to realize that there is an ugly stepsister, that Jacob had 2 wives, that there's a parallel kingdom, that Abraham's seed are like the stars of the sky and like the sand of the seashore. They can't be numbered. So just because we are of the stars of the sky and we are the circumcision of the heart made by faith does not mean that there still aren't children of Leah out there. All right, they're out there. And we are partakers in their blessings. And our duty is also to minister unto them in carnal or natural things. So just don't ever forget it. And don't get into, it's a Roman doctrine. This Jew hating is a Roman doctrine. Just don't give it any place. Don't get into it. It is an errant, aberrant, abhorrent Roman papist doctrine. All right, let's cover a few things here in 15 and 16. The apostle says, the missionary on the foreign field says, strive together with me in your prayers to God for me. It's in 15:30. And I'd ask you to do that. Here I am. Paul was the Lord's prisoner. You know, he writes and signs some of these letters. The Lord's ambassador in bonds, the Lord's prisoner. And I am definitely the Lord's outcast. And that's why I can get on here and tell you about your right to rampage and what our founding fathers believed. Because God bless the USA, I'm not allowed to be there. And then the apostle says, I'd like to come to you. You know when you invite yourself to a party or invite yourself to somebody's house? In our culture, that's considered like pretty, that's a lot of effrontery. That's a lot of, but these people loved the apostle so much. And they wanted him to come. And they had bidden him to come. And they had hoped that he could come. And they knew that the wisdom of God was in him. And so the apostle just basically says that I may come unto you with joy by the will of God, and may with you be refreshed. You know, he knew that they were keeping some offerings for him, which is another thing, that when people ask for it, hey buddy, can you spare a dime? You know, in our culture, that's like a nail biter to have to do. And for those of us that have given ourselves to the work and burned all our bridges behind us and left from our language and people and tongue in the house of our Father, understand that there is supposed to be a joy and a willingness on behalf of the hearers. All right. I'm just going to keep on going back. So, you know, the apostle tells how he was something of an outcast. In 1522, he says, I've been much hindered from coming to you. And then he says, but now having no more place in these parts. I ain't got no more place in these parts. That sounds like something John Wayne would say. But he had gotten to the point, he had worked to the point that he wasn't allowed to be any longer where he was. And here again, and having a great desire these many years to come unto you, he very much wanted to come and check in and enjoy fellowship with these servants. I mean, these other believers, Whensoever I take my journey into Spain, I will come to you, for I trust to see you in my journey. Oh, and then he's talking about the donation again. Vinny, thanks for bringing that up. He tells about the donation again. And to be brought on my way thitherward by you, if first I be somewhat filled with your company. So he says, I'm really going to enjoy visiting a little bit and talking about old times. I feel a little old myself sometimes when I start to reminisce, when I see Top Gun Maverick and I'm like, all right, so why are they playing music from the 70s when this movie was from the 80s and the late 80s at that? This was strictly electronic modern rock, and here they're playing Slow Ride, classics from the 70s. Anyway, I feel a little old sometimes when I think about that. They played from the 60s, but those were oldies in 1986, so that's why they were in the original Top Gun. So that's the way it was. But the apostle felt a little old, but he said, if first I'd be somewhat filled with your company. He wanted to hang out with them and kick it around and chat about his hometown and what had happened 20, 30 years before, with people that were there and shared that with him. So pretty cool. But he's got no more place in these parts. And backing up a little bit more, he says in verse 19 that the places where he had been, the gospel was fully preached. How cool is that? And what does it mean when the gospel is fully preached? Well, first of all, it's a little bit of an admonition. We'll get into admonitions more in a moment. But the apostle is letting us know that there's such a thing as preaching part of the gospel, a little of the gospel, hinting at the gospel. And then, of course, there's preaching the gospel, straightforward. And then he says, I have fully preached the gospel. Well, he defines it right here. Through mighty signs and wonders. All right, so there weren't any miracles? The angels didn't appear? Okay, well, the gospel was not fully preached. And, Clay Sonmore, one of my mentors and good friend who's gone on to be with the Lord, he was the last of 17 men who founded a great outfit called the Full Gospel. Businessmen. They didn't claim to be preachers. They didn't believe in Nicolaitanism. They didn't believe in a clergy class. But they started it with the full gospel and the determination that the gospel, where they went, would be fully preached. And it was preached with mighty signs and wonders. And here the verse continues, by the power of the Spirit of God. And then he tells in 20, that he strived. Yea, so have I strived to preach the gospel. Not where Christ was named. He wanted to plow virgin ground and bust the clods. He didn't want to build on something that someone else had built. It's hard to do that today. Almost everybody's got bad habits. The gospel was fully preached. So a Satanist who used to come around and uproot works, this was one verse that he would harp on from time to time. And he had such a sneaky way about him. He almost learned to people almost slither like a snake as they're moving up on their point. And then they'll hit you with it. So here it was from Romans 15:14. We just haven't learned how to admonish one another. We just haven't learned how to admonish one another. Here's the verse, 15:14. And I myself also am persuaded of you, my brethren, that ye also are full of goodness, filled with all knowledge, able also to admonish one another. And sure enough, in the community, and this is what we're going to talk more about on Memorial Day, is how the law was in the hands of the community. We talk of lynchings today like they're a very bad thing. And in Mexico it is illegal, but it happens pretty often too. And then, when the crook is strung up and nobody says nothing, just like in the great movies of the 80s, here at the end of Roadhouse, the criminal syndicates taken down, and they blow the bad guy away with all of their shotguns, and then they gather him up, and here in comes the law, local yokel sheriff or town cop, who was on the take. This guy was paying him. And he comes in and says, "What the hell happened here?" And he says, "I didn't see nothing." And he just turns to each person. "I didn't see nothing. I didn't see nothing." Well, you know what? That's what happens in Mexico when somebody gets lynched. And there's signs up. "We lynch thieves. Thief, you will be lynched. Just so you know, you'll be lynched if you're caught stealing here, if you're caught causing trouble." And that power that's in the community is hinted to here in Romans 15:14. So, this is what the jury is. The sheriff of Tulsa got brought up on charges, and they were going to put together a grand jury and look at indicting him. This was maybe 3-4 years ago. 5 years, I don't know. So, the sheriff comes out, and here's what he said. "I'm not opposed to a grand jury as long as it's properly impaneled." Well, sure enough, they did bring together a grand jury, and the grand jury did have some incriminating findings, and that sheriff did either step down or was removed. But the fact that he would say that, the fact that he would say that the grand jury is properly impaneled, just goes to show that he didn't understand that this is the community. This is a doing of the community. When he said properly impaneled, he meant that authority was going to come down from above. Like from what? The Department of Justice, which is totally corrupt. Who? The Supreme Court? The feds? The judicial branch? Come on. No, it comes from the community. And as we're walking the graveyard on Memorial Day, just remember, the people are down in those holes dead and didn't get to live, and a lot of them didn't have kids, and they don't, they didn't have progeny. They gave their lives so that we could continue with this belief, and the belief is lost, that the community has this power to judge crimes. But before they judge a crime, they tell somebody, "Hey, we've been studying the Bible for a long time, and what you're doing is destructive of the ends of our community's pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And pretty soon, "Hey, Monica, thanks for coming around. Thank you for coming. Where you hail from? Send me another message. Let me know where you're at. Are you on the beach?" So you see, this troublemaker, the reason he would slither in and talk about this verse was because he wanted to admonish, was because he wasn't part of the class that was part of the brethren and full of goodness and filled with all knowledge. This guy was an infiltrator. Okay, let's stop going backwards. Let's go forwards. Let's talk about the infiltrators. Chapter 12. Let's start at the head of 14. "Him that is weak receive in the faith, him that is weak in the faith receive ye, but not to doubtful disputations." So somebody who comes around and is weak in the faith, we're to receive. But then the moment that they're like, sneak in and say, "I'd just like to admonish you on this point," and then they tell us to go away from, the faith that's handed down to us by our forefathers, that they go away from the counsel of goodness, from the counsel of the community of people who are full of goodness and who are full of knowledge, and he's going to come in and say, "We need to admonish one another." Yeah, that guy was trouble. So you're not supposed to receive that guy. And that's what this means. Who's weak in the faith, receive, but not to doubtful disputations. And there's more to say about that, but let's go all the way back to the rewind. I want you to see the verses that people use to tell us that we should never, ever, ever, the community should never, ever judge a crime. So let's just talk about them. Let's hash it out real quick. 12:18. "If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. All right, so this is the first verse that's quoted. You're supposed to live peaceably with all men. If it's possible. How do you live at peace with someone who's destructive of our community's ends of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? When someone is defiling the community, when they're causing trouble, then that's not living peaceably. And that's not depending on you. So here this verse is full of ifs, like two big ifs. If it be possible, if you can talk to this guy, if it depends on you, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. You know, my dad's hero is Bugs Bunny, because Bugs Bunny is, every Bugs Bunny episode, Bugs Bunny's trying to build something, you know, he's got a project, he's just happily going about his day. And then there comes an antagonist. This is how it always starts. Whether the antagonist is Elmer Fudd or whether it's, you know, it could be a number of troublemakers that show up to cause trouble for Bugs Bunny. So Bugs was, see, he was trying to live peaceably with all men. When there's an antagonist, all right, your if is discarded. Okay, 19, dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Let's read it all, and then I'll comment. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. All right, so this is a quote of the Proverbs. Let's just look at Proverbs 25. Bounce back to it. Psalms, Proverbs. Isn't it wonderful how your Bible will just go to the Psalms? Because they're full of happiness and beautiful things and victory and overcoming. 25:21. If thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. For thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord shall reward thee. So, you know, Elisha did this after he had crushed the enemy army by faith, struck him with blindness, marched him into a defense city, and all the archers were up there from an elevated position just ready to hammer him. And the king says to the prophet, shall I smite them, Lord? He calls the prophet Lord. Shall I smite them, Lord? Shall I smite them? And Elisha said, no, treat them like captives that you took with your own sword and your own bow in battle according to the Geneva Convention. He said treat them. That's lovely, Monica. I hope you got it out. Let's have some fun. Your dad's favorite is Bugs Bunny. That's great. Awesome. We're having fun out on studying the Word. It's supposed to be that way. This is why the apostle said, I long to be filled with your company. You know, it's nice to talk with people that are just civil. And we should not dread going to church, you know. Let me tell you, when I was a young fella, going to church really interfered with my duck hunts badly. That was really my only good day to hunt ducks. And I could not. Oh, Yosemite Sam. Yeah. See, it's fun to talk about old times. It's a lot of fun to talk about old times. So, those captives were treated according to the Geneva Convention. They were fed, given food and water. The king set food and water before them. And then the Bible says, and then the Syrians entered not into Israel during, I think, the whole rest of the reign of that king. They didn't come back. So he ended a war by putting this proverb into effect. A proverb that had been written, because, you know, it was centuries after the Proverbs were written. They put it into effect. But, you know, some people do not ever learn. When you're dealing with a reprobate, when you're dealing with a condemned criminal, very often grace is not the answer. It's not the answer. And avenging ourselves is very different from the community executing a prescribed penalty for a a violation of a prescribed, that is pre-written laws. Pre-written laws with pre-written penalties. And laws that are made by the community, okay? Not a thick encyclopedic series of books. In Plymouth Colony, 5 laws carried the death penalty. And they had some other rules too, but 5 that carried the death penalty. How easy is that? Don't be Hazel the witch. Don't intentionally burn a structure or a ship. And the 3 were all sexual. Adultery, death penalty. Bestiality, death penalty. Murder was the other one. And really, where this says avenge not yourself, that's talking more about murder. That does not mean that people don't have the right to throw off the yoke with lethal force of any establishment that is destructive of the ends of our community to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you know, people look at this and then they take it to stand alone. Let's look over to 12. Let us put on the armor of light. You're supposed to arm yourself. And not only with natural weapons, also with spiritual weapons. The Bible's full of spiritual weapons. You know, defeating your enemy is a spiritual weapon. Which, by the way, after studying this verse yesterday and today, I actually did that today. Just in case you might think I'm the cold-bloodedest killer that's ever been. And I've done a lot of teaching on Romans 13, really put all the coffin nails in there against the traditional heretical doctrines, horrible doctrines come up Romans 13. And I just want you to think of this one verse, verse 4, that there's a minister of God for good and to be afraid of. For he beareth not the sword in vain. And he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. And I hope that you can see yourself in that, looking in the mirror, that God has called his servants, especially as they come to maturity and start to reproduce after their kind, that they have a duty to be a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. So here we have avenge not and be a revenger. Kind of that close to one another on the page. So maybe this avenge not yourselves isn't the whole story. That's all I'm saying. You know, remember, we're honoring the people who fought and died. Who fought and died. They fought someone to the death and inherited not the promise, so that we could put on the armor of light. Okay, so here we kind of paused at Romans 14:1. Him that is weak in the faith receive ye, but not under doubtful disputations. And then it tells, some people follow the Mosaic law or their own rules about dietary things. And then, and not only about, you know, what should and shouldn't be eaten of itself, but what was sacrificed to idols, which is pretty common. Okay, so you walk in the Chinese restaurant and there's that little cat doing this. You're eating food in the house of idols. If there's a Buddha there with his big fat belly, you're definitely in the house of idols. And if that Buddha, now you'll never be able to enjoy your Chinese food again. If that Buddha has some coins and some little orange slices and some little foodstuffs around it, then you're dealing with committed idolaters that are giving offerings to a dumb idol. So this is talking about you. I'm going to find that spot for you. I think we have to move over to Galatians to get that. Galatians, first chapter. Okay. Here we go. I love this. And he that doubteth is damned if he eat, because he eateth not of faith, for whatsoever is not of faith is sin. Ugh, that's a big one. Where is this about the idols? Regardeth not the day, whether we live or die, we die unto the Lord. Oh, I wouldn't worry about Chinese vases. If you got any African masks with hideous expressions, I'd burn those suckers. I'll tell you what, though, if it has a pagan deity on it, then you have a problem. And there's a reason that this is in the that the Buddha is there in the Chinese restaurant. Regarding the day, it was right here. I just didn't mark it. Where this is clearly talking about idols. So understand that this is not just about the Mosaic law. And you know, a lot of people got a bad attitude. Thanks, Monica. A lot of people have a bad attitude about me keeping the feasts and teaching on the feasts. And you know, we got a feast coming up. It's the Feast of Tabernacles, and it's unfulfilled. You know, we should be expecting on the Feast of Tabernacles that the Shekinah glory of God is going to come down and overshadow us, like when the people dwelt in tabernacles 40 years in the wilderness. But some people got a bad idea that I want to do that, or they got a bad attitude that I'm a Sabbath keeper. Bad attitude. They're like, hey, you should be hustling today. Well, you know, the Bible says it'll be a sign forever, the sign that people keep the Sabbath and honor God on that day and rest. So here we go. Him this weak in the faith receive ye, but not to doubtful disputations. For one believeth that he may eat all things, another who is weak eateth herbs. So, you know, this is out there. A lot of people, beyond the Mosaic law, they're like, you know what? It's gonna be vegetation only. Nothing that comes from an animal, said the Scottish vegetarian to me as he was shivering with 2 sweaters on. You know, I'm glad that he got over his sickness, because he had a very serious sickness before he stopped eating meat. But I'll tell you what, his oatmeal just was not cutting the mustard like my huge plate of eggs Benedict, bacon and eggs and sausage and hash browns. Yeah, his breakfast was not working. I think he even poured some safflower oil on it or something and try to get it to stick a little better. 2 thick wool sweaters. One man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. Okay, so you know, we have this regarding the Sabbath. He that regardeth the day regardeth it unto the Lord. He that regardeth not the day to the Lord, he doth not regard it. He that eateth, eateth to the Lord, for he giveth God thanks. And he that eateth not to the Lord, he eateth not and giveth God thanks. For none of us liveth to himself, and no man dieth to himself. So do you see that these are all believers? Do you see that these are, that there's not somebody that's coming in there and being like, coming in with a Buddhist ideology? No, they're not coming in with that. Maybe in 1 Corinthians 8. Let's just take a quick looky-loo since I've hang out for so long. Okay. 1 Corinthians 8:7. Howbeit there is not in every man that knowledge, for some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing offered unto an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. So see, this is the passage I was thinking of. It goes straight on. Yes, Monica, this is why we bless our food. There's the environment's full of poisons. We don't know where it came from. I certainly don't trust the people that are behind the counter, flipping the burgers. I don't trust them at all. And then out in front, a lot of times they got their idol right there. And you better bless your food like a missionary if you're going to eat in the house of idols. You better. You better. But do it to the Lord. We're supposed to all come to a unity of faith. We're supposed to all grow up a little, and that's why this tells about whose faith is weak, receiving the faith. We're supposed to limp him along until they get a clue, until they get their head around the word a little bit more. These kids come in the dojo. I've almost got them figured out which is right, and which is left. Say, everybody hold up your right hand. And sometimes we get half, sometimes 3/4. Sometimes we get 100%. And I'll just look at the one, and they'll look at everybody else and figure out that they're holding up the wrong hand. So this is where we have to start. But eventually, they can actually practice karate. All right. Left foot forward. Front kicks. Let's go. Start counting in Japanese. But in the beginning, you got to deal with them not knowing right and left. And the apostle was telling that the word of God is the same way. That people come around and their heads full of all of this nonsense. And we accept him whose faith is weak, but not to doubtful disputations. Not to them come in and saying, oh, well, you guys just don't know how to admonish one another, so I'm going to teach you the Sodomitic way. No. Yeah. Yeah. I might get kicked off YouTube if I tell that joke. So we'll just save it. All right. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Grandpa Sam really liked to say that. See, some forefathers out before him understood that saying was from the Bible. And he that doubteth is damned if he eat. You see there's an idol there? You don't have to bless it like a missionary. Don't eat. You're damned if you eat. You're condemned. A condemnation will come on you. So whatsoever is not of faith is of sin. Don't fool around with witchcraft. Take it from a guy that lives in the jungle. Okay. Almost done with my walkthrough here. It is good neither do you eat flesh. Do we have our lisping Bible reader to read out of the Message Bible? Which is not a Bible. Romans 14. It sounds like, all right. Or is offended, or is made weak. It is good neither to eat flesh, nor to drink wine, nor anything whereby thy brother stumbleth, or is offended, or is made weak. 14:15. But if thy brother be grieved with thy meat, now walkest thou not charitably. Destroy not him with thy meat, for whom Christ died. So this came up years ago when we were at the Christian University, and the RA, whose uncle went south, went Unitarian. He actually pastored for years, moved to Chicago and pastored the largest Unitarian work in Chicago, which is kind of a landmark for Unitarianism and the Unitarian movement. It's totally heretical. Anyhow, his nephew was RAing, and he was on this subject. And he says, no, you don't drink wine ever again if it hurts anybody's feelings. So that's what he drew from this chapter. Todo lo puedo en Cristo que me fortalece. Así dijo San Pablo a los filipenses. En el capítulo 4, en el versículo 13. Todo lo puedo en Cristo que me fortalece. There's a nice little chorus for you. So, Monica, that's that verse. Okay. When 1 Corinthians 8:12, when ye so sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, ye sin against Christ. Wherefore, if meat make my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend. So see, the RA kind of had a point. Because here the apostle said, look, if it's an offense to my brother, I will never do it again. You know, an old woman got a marriage proposal 50 years after their graduation. Both found themselves single. This man proposed and she said, I won't marry you, you drink whiskey. And he said, well, if that's all it is, I'll never touch another drop. And you know what she said? And he did it. And he did it. He made that sacrifice for her. Till his death. Never had another drop of whiskey. She married him. Let's go back to Romans. I don't want you to miss it because everybody does. So what everybody takes from this is that the mealy-mouthed, vine of Sodom infiltrator is allowed to come in and curtail our liberty on every point and cut us down where we don't eat good food, where we don't drink wine, where we don't have another drop of whiskey, where we don't say things that may be offensive to them, that we don't run around with our AR. I'm going to talk about that, by the way, about our right to rampage on this day. And I want you to go back to Romans 14:1. If somebody's a believer and they're just weak and they don't know the right from their left, you can still let them in class. They're going to be lost a little bit. And eventually somebody has to say, hey, the other one first, this one first, then this one, then this one, then this one. It's this one first. Left one first. This is your left. No, that's the other left. So you receive him who's weak in the faith. That doesn't mean that you let the troublemaker in. But not to doubtful disputations. You know what a doubtful disputation is? When Mr. Mealymouth comes up and says, the problem is we haven't learned how to admonish one another. And then they try to take everybody off in the left field. So, those troublemakers that are offended by everything, you're not even supposed to have them in your fellowship. See, you're supposed to use force and knock them out of the fellowship before that. Close the door behind them. And then there's going to be the joy that Paul spoke to the fellowships of. The gospel's fully preached. I want to trust to see you in my journey and to be brought on my way thitherward by you, if first I be somewhat filled with your company. You're supposed to not even have them around because they're destructive to the ends of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, that's what our Bible-believing forefathers wrote. I know there is an errant theology out there that they were all Masons and devil worshippers and secretly in cahoots. No, they broke away from the Pope. You know, I got a playlist called Good Preaching, and on there is the United States and Britain in Bible prophecy. It's like something everybody should watch. And I just tipped this sacred cow. Splash. Strive together with me in your prayers. to God for me, that I may be delivered from them that do not believe in Judea, and that my service which I have for Jerusalem may be accepted of the saints. You know, that's my life. You may not be able to imagine it, but yeah. I need to be delivered from them that do not believe. Hard troublemakers. Real murderers. And I have to accomplish my service. And it takes some striving. And it takes for other people to strive. And he asks them to strive in prayers. Alright, let's talk about guns for a minute, since we're gospel gunslingers. Maybe I'll talk about it a little bit on BitChute. I'd just like to remember today that while there are these high-profile events, which are all fabricated in one way or another, where somebody went on the rampage, they are designed to eliminate your right to rampage, your right to destroy anything that is destructive to your family and community of the ends of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And our forefathers absolutely believed that. What's wrong with the sheriff of Tulsa to say, oh yeah, well, I don't oppose a grand jury investigating me as long as it's properly impaneled? No, I'm going to just go as far as I can here, Monica. So he didn't believe that the power was in the community at all. He believed that the power came down from above. He says, oh yeah, I'll let the community judge me if it's okay with the Pope. Up with King Charlie and down with the Pope. Up a long ladder and down a short rope. That's an old saying that predates America, predates our own revolution. That the people supported the sovereigns that were able defenders of the faith, the Christian faith. And that all the armies of the world were not to be given account. You know the Second Amendment. No, I don't think you know. The Second Amendment is about your right to rampage. Your right to disestablish the establishment. And just because some wound up monarch multiples on psychiatric drugs, pumped full of Adderall, with a CIA shrink instead of a daddy, just because they misuse every American's right to rampage, doesn't mean that you don't have a right to rampage. You have a right to rampage and a duty to rampage. You know, by the time I was a senior in high school, I'd been on so many hunts. I had so much knowledge of weapons handling. I had so many years of karate. All 119 pounds. Wrecking machine. I so much like being stronger and heavier. Still little. But I had power to rampage when I was 17 that these wound up idiots have no concept of. No concept. No concept. You know, Grandpa Sam, they used to bring their guns to school. They used to hunt on the way to school. So if you didn't know, there's such a thing as a township. And a township is a grid that's 6 miles by 6 miles. 6 and 6. So there's 36 sections. That is, a mile square is a section, 640 acres. And then in that section, as this great land was settled, people would get maybe a quarter section, maybe only 40 acres. 40 acres is a lot to work unless you've got, a family and some strong stock in the days before tractors. 40 acres is a lot of arable land. We're not talking about desert cattle land. We're talking about the Great Plains. So in 6 miles by 6 miles, that's 36, one township, that's 36 sections. So you've got maybe 100 families, maybe 200, that are farming on that and living on their stakes. So one of those 36 sections that was out in the central part was set aside for the school. And, Laura Ingalls Wilder writes about this. The harvest of that land then provided for the school. So this is how the school got built and the teacher got paid, was because that land could be leased and used, that one of those sections. And so the different kids walked to school. And it may be as far as 4 miles to school, even though it was a central section. If somebody was from the corner section of that township, then they got to walk down a mile, down a mile, down a mile. All right. Yeah, when we got out of school, we got out at like 2:45, and pheasant shooting hours close at 4:30. So you got to be ready. You got to be ready. You got to have all your gear packed so that you could go out on your pheasant hunt. And it was all sitting in the school parking lot every day, and everybody knew. It wasn't any secret. So this is in my age, in a pretty big city. But in Grandpa's age, they used to go to the one-room schoolhouse, and in the one-room schoolhouse, they'd lean their rifles there in the corner and have school. They'd hunt rabbits and squirrels on the way to school during their 4-mile walk, and then they'd go walk 4 miles home and hunt. And then, they had that duty to bring home the grub for the family. So, a little joke that Grandpa Sam played, and some of the other school kids, is they'd take little rimfire .22 shells, and they had a wood stove in the center of their one-room schoolhouse. And somebody would balance a .22 cartridge on top of that wood stove as it's, hot as blazes in the winter. So everybody's studying, and then pow! A loud pow as that .22 long rifle shell would go off and leave a little hole in the ceiling. Well, already they had a teacher in those days, so this is probably before the Depression. Well, in the Depression. It was in the 1930s. They had a teacher that was a little bit cityfied, didn't really understand what was going on. So they got away with that several times, but then somebody left a shotgun shell, probably a 20-gauge shotgun shell, on top of the wood stove. And when that went off, it just went kaboom and, damaged the ceiling. And Grandpa Sam would, like so many Grandpa Sam stories, he could never quite remember who it was that did it, which we learned later on in life that was the indication that it was probably him. It was probably Grandpa Sam that did that. And that's the good fun that happened in those days. And you know what else happened in those days? A lot of ass whoopings. A lot of fist fights. A lot of fist fights. And just so that everybody knows, as we have gravitated as a society away from fist fights, the moment the lights go out, first of all, there's going to be a wave of violence that's going to shock everyone. Then after that, when people are trying to rebuild their communities, the first thing that's going to come back is the ass whooping. It's going to come back. And it's going to come back under the understanding that a lot of times criminals are not dedicated to their trade. They're criminals because they lack the discipline to earn and to build. They think it's easier to take from somebody else. And because of that, their kung fu is generally very poor. Very poor. Their kung fu is generally very poor. And so it's easy to teach the bad guy a lesson. Now I understand that there's this barbarian class that's been trained in colleges and universities that are set up for that effect in the United States prison system. In fact, so many thousands of graduates of that institution were sent that they ruined the entire nation of El Salvador, and El Salvador is now under martial law as tens of thousands of them are being rounded up and shackled. So there is that barbarian class. But understand that generally, criminals, kung fu is terrible. So it's very easy to give them a whooping. It's very easy to teach them a lesson for someone who makes a point to be a gentleman, who makes a point to be a Renaissance man, who studies history and studies battles and studies warfare. And you know what? What about the hunts? I'll tell you what makes somebody a dangerous warrior. Hunting and hunting and hunting and hunting. And you know, none of these punk kids that are out doing their addled, drug-fueled, programmed rampages, none of them are hunters. You know, somebody tweeted, how many NRA members do a mass event like this? None! None! Because this is not the way that Renaissance men who love life, love wildlife, love the environment, love their community, love their family, and make a point to study and be experts and to be safe. You know, it takes a lot of study to be safe with a weapon. It's just, yeah, you know, these lefties, when they have their armed marches, they got ADs all over the place. It's a wonder they all survive. And in battle, they will not, because it takes a lot on a good day to handle weapons safely. And when people are scared, when they're tired, when they're cold, when they're malnourished, when they're dehydrated, all that becomes harder. And yeah, a lot of people are just going to fall on their own sword. But on this day, I want to leave you with this memorial. I want to leave you with this memory that there are many people that did not live. They did not live because they fought to the death to preserve our rights and to prevent tyrants from coming in and running over those rights. And we do them an enormous disservice today if we are not willing to do the same thing. And you know, I'd stand up next to them and defend her still today. There ain't no doubt I love this land, even though I'm not allowed there. God bless the USA. God bless you. Have a great day.